Hi, everyone. Welcome to Thanks for Sharing. I am your host, Jackie Pack, and I have on this episode with me today Josh and Charlene Lewis. Welcome to the podcast, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So I met Josh kind of randomly waiting for a flight that we had a long wait for the flight at the ITAP symposium. And so we started talking and just have been in touch. You guys are in Florida, correct?
Yep, Miami.
Yeah, so I asked them to come on the podcast, Josh and his wife Charlene, who's also a therapist, and just kind of share their story, talk about addiction, addiction recovery, partner betrayal, intimacy, and then the program that they started in 2020 for those struggling with sex addiction who maybe residential treatment didn't work or somebody couldn't go because they just can't leave home for that long. And so
Right.
we will get into that as well. So thanks, guys. Anything else you want to say about yourselves?
Well, we've been a couple. We've been married for, let's see, 16, coming on 16 years,
Yep.
October.
Nice.
We, I mean, you disclose now, yes.
We're both in recovery. And we met in recovery, so we're very passionate about what we do and, just trying to help as many people as possible. And
Mhm.
I think it's, having the clinical experience, but also the experiential experience,
Yeah.
having
Awesome.
gone through it. And we just know how difficult, it can be, like working on yourself, addiction, marriage. But I think as a couple, we also know the benefits of working through all that and like seeing how relationships change and flourish, and it's amazing.
Yeah, which I think is awesome for you guys to be able to talk about because for people, for couples who are at the beginning stages, that can provide a lot of hope to know that after all of this, that the relationship does flourish and can be a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, it took a little bit of acclimation, the first 5 years, I would say. But I think we trust our ability to work through things, and a lot of that has come from just work that we've had to do really in recovery, having to do therapy ourselves, and then just learning how to be in a partnership is at least for me was is and still is always, the main challenge in life, really.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I often say that relationships are people making machines.
Hmm.
Like we really get to know ourselves because this person gets to know us for good or bad, right? Like weaknesses and strengths. And there's just a lot that happens in a relationship that I think it eventually makes us a better person, but can also be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the quality of my relationship usually has doesn't really come down so much to my partner. It really has a lot more to do with me,
Hmm.
and how honest I am about where I'm at. And yeah, so for better or worse, it like forces me to do the work, the internal
Hmm.
work, which
Yeah.
is at the end of the day, I think spiritually is the reason why there is a partnership. It's like to work through things together.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where do you want to start?
Where do you want to start? Start.
I think we can start with, what sex addiction is, what it's not.
Okay.
And a lot of times my experience has been that a lot of men, I mostly work with men, they'll come in and they're not really sure if they're addicts, if they're not addicts. And, there's a lot of like generational, cultural components of like, well, all guys watch porn, or, all guys go to like strip joints for happy hours after work. And kind of like debunking, some of that stuff, and recognizing like what is the impact that it's having in the relationship, and
Hmm.
and on the individual. Um, I think when we start kind of educating them on addiction more as an intimacy disorder and trying to like reduce some of that shame of whatever they're watching and doing, they tend to relate to that, right? Because it's like we're not just talking about the present, but we're talking about intimacy issues that they've had, with mom, with dad, with girlfriends, with the first wife, the second wife. And it's like, okay, the addiction piece is just a mask for, all of that other stuff. And I think it's important for people, to understand that. And I think that reduces the shame because there's a lot of shame around sex in general, forget about sex addiction.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say too, with a lot of clients, that usually resonates up front because they know that this is something bigger. They may not know what you just explained, but
I'm so
they
sorry.
know they know it is something bigger. And so to talk about that up front and talk about addressing all of those issues, I mean, it is a lot of work and it does take time. And, I think they resonate with it. So what were you going to say,
I think
Josh?
it's also really, really daunting for a bunch of reasons. I mean, for one, guys will talk about porn or acting out in other ways amongst themselves sometimes, but for the most part, it's just like such an icky topic, and there's so much shame around it. Forget about just for sex addicts, but just societally, there is so much shame around this practice, and all the way from doctors, lawyers, to actually many of the clinicians who would like to be treating this don't have enough education on what it truly is. And I think sometimes, or many times, people behave in ways that, maybe they feel there's something wrong with it. Maybe there isn't. It's probably not compulsive at all, but they carry so much shame that they would rather push sex addiction aside and say, no, that's not an issue. There's nothing to see here, even clinicians. So it becomes difficult for those people who desperately need help to, when they're seeking help, to have it, validated that yes, this is an issue and there is a solution. So
Right.
it's hard to find help.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think clients are becoming more aware, or potential clients are becoming more aware that there are specialists who are trained to do this. But still, sometimes they've gone through several therapists before they find that one who actually has the expertise to help them.
Yeah. So to piggyback on that, it's, that has been a lot of my experience. By the time they get to me, they've gone to like, a couple of other clinicians who maybe aren't certified sex addiction therapists. Some are just, licensed therapists, certified sex therapists, but not like the addiction piece, or, addiction counselors, but not, sexually. And, I think as clinicians, I want to believe that we all try to do, the best that we can, and we all want to help our clients. But I think there also has to be an understanding that I can't help everyone. It's like I have
Hmm.
my expertise and what I've been trained on. And sometimes, we could do more harm than good if we try to, work on everything. And that was part of my own story, of like how I became a sex addiction therapist. I started off as a substance abuse counselor, as, an addiction therapist, and worked in a residential treatment center for like 10 years. And a lot of the alcoholics and addicts that I would see had sexual issues.
Hmm.
And, the partners were like, well, how are we going to have sex again? And, we always had sex when he was high or she was drunk or whatever it was. And no one was talking about it, right? Like in team meetings and like supervision. And I think it's kind of like what Josh was saying. Sometimes, even as a therapist, they may be uncomfortable talking about sex. So they kind of just like ignored that whole piece. And I remember thinking, like, this is kind of crazy. Like, these people are going to go back out and, try to have relationships, and it's going to be really difficult. So I went to become a certified sex therapist. not really knowing what that was. I thought it was going to be more like trauma work around sex, and I didn't realize
Mm,
it was more like, orgasm disorders and erectile dysfunction, and more behavioral. And then in that community, there was also some, they believe in sex addiction, they don't believe in sex addiction. So, but I knew that I wanted to go deeper, and I feel like the ITAP and like the whole CSAT model like really allowed me to go deeper in treating that, But
yeah.
and it's important to have someone like, I'm like, if I have a client come to me with like an eating disorder, I'm like, I'm not an eating disorder specialist. Yes, it's a
Hmm.
process addiction, but that's not what I specialize in. So I'm going to refer them out. And I think that that's like the best that we can do as clinicians, and work on our own issues with sex. And I think that's, what Josh was kind of talking about. It's if I don't do my own therapeutic work and know what triggers me, and I'm in front of a client, that can really, change the dynamic of the therapeutic relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a therapist, you can only take your clients as far as you have gone
Yeah,
individually in your own work.
100%.
Yeah.
So, Josh, tell me a little bit about your
My
recovery story. Yeah, addiction
story.
story into recovery.
So I was lucky enough to bottom out with alcohol and drugs at the age of 26. So that was 2003. And I had attempted to stop drinking for a while, a couple times. I remember a therapist referring me to AA and me making a meeting and saying, "This is absolutely ridiculous. Like, I don't know why you guys are making such a big fuss over all of this. And there's just one rule: you don't drink, and I'm not going to do that." And I didn't drink for about 6 months, and that was very, very painful. And I wouldn't recommend that to people who are hardcore alcoholics, because I was miserable, and I was angry, and I was in a ton of fear. And eventually I did drink, and I mixed it with benzos, and I overdosed, and went into respiratory arrest. And somebody found me and breathed for me for nearly an hour and kept me alive. And so when I woke up, I was given the opportunity to go to treatment, and I did. And that was the beginning of something great. I really felt like I had no choice but to accept help and accept love. And although I didn't trust very many people, I started to, and um, recovery became a very real thing. So something that I couldn't really stop and stay stopped and enjoy my life stopping, all of a sudden became a non-issue doing what these people were telling me to do. And that was kind of miraculous. So I fell in love with recovery and working with other guys. And it's been a big part of my life since. For me, it was alcohol, drugs, then it became um, sex, then it became food. So, like 10 years in, um, you know, porn was a thing. And my wife was like, "Look, dude, any more of that, and this is over." And
Because the funny, not so funny, but like how, God works is when all of, like when my discovery came of his porn stuff, I think I was doing like mod 2 as
Oh.
to get trained as a CSAT. So I'm like, oh no, we are not going down this route.
Yes, I had friends that I met doing my CSAT modules, and unfortunately, one of them had that experience as well going through the training.
yeah, and so during that period, I was like, I need extra help. I mean, here I am making tons of meetings, sponsoring guys, and this is something that I can't say. And truth be told, it actually was my first addiction, and came about because I was exposed to it, and some sexual abuse. And I think the shame that I experienced early on with that needed to get medicated with drugs and alcohol. And so that was always what was numbing me through my sex addiction, really. And so eventually, at some point, when the alcohol and drugs, left, that had to go too.
Hmm.
And so I didn't really feel like I had all of the tools that I needed in 12-step fellowship. And I love 12-step fellowship, but SA, SLA meetings, for whatever reason, were a little odd. They're great, but I saw so many people relapsing, including my sponsor who had 5 years. I was like, so I just happened to see a sex addiction therapist, and she's here in Miami. She's awesome. Her name is Carol Clark. And she did EMDR with me, and that was game changing. Where I was able to go back to original trauma and, basically walk into situations that I experienced and grab that little kid and hold him and take him out and make sure that he was safe. And I remember these sessions were just like me retching and sobbing, and it was really, really worth it. And it was so freeing. And I think that's what gave me what I needed to move into um, working on the sex addiction. And I realized that there was a lot more in 12-step than 12-step recovery that I needed for sex addiction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how long would you say? So Charlene says, yeah, that's not going to happen. That can't continue. How long would you say that process was for you to get to that point where you said like this was working and became a big part of your life?
45 minutes?
Yeah, he said about 45 minutes. Yeah, it wasn't, I am blessed that Josh has always been willing to do like the self-searching and like the working on himself, as I am as well. Like we are both very into healing as individuals and getting better and getting closer and a stronger relationship with God, right? Like spirituality is at the center of our recovery. So it's like there's a problem. Okay, where do we go fix it? So it really didn't take a lot. It literally was about 45 minutes. He called Carol Clark, made an appointment, and that was that. And we also had the experience of being sober already from, another addiction. So we knew that it worked.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, going through another layer. And I always tell clients it's like whack-a-mole, like you pop one down, something else pops up. And we address them as they go popping up. First it was alcohol, then it was sex addiction, then it was workaholism. Like if I were to go to a 12-step program for like every issue that pops up, I wouldn't be able to work.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, like with our therapist and with the work that we do, it's like what he's saying, it's always going back to that initial trauma, that connecting, with that part of ourselves, that inner child, the teenager, the, whatever part we want to call it. And it's a process, but it's going back to that. And I tell, another thing, which is like one of like, I guess like the myths of, oh, there has to be like this huge trauma, and a lot of my clients are like, no, I haven't had trauma. And we talk about in EMDR, like, the big T's and the little T's, right? Like big traumas, little traumas. It doesn't have to be, physical abuse or sexual abuse. If it's there, it's there. But sometimes, grow, like, I know I had more of like the, in your face kind of trauma, but Josh always describes, his childhood as tumbleweeds, right? Like there
Mm-hmm.
was no air.
Yeah.
It's traumatic. And when I tell clients that, sometimes they're like, oh yeah, that kind of happened to me. I'm like, okay, how do you think that little kid felt? So they really start seeing life and relationships in a different way because they just think it's normal, what they experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also important, and Josh and I talk about this all the time, like when to introduce some of these topics, because sometimes like if you introduce them a little too early, it may be like overwhelming. Like, I remember when I started doing IFS work with my therapist and we were starting to kind of like talk about like all these different parts, I thought I was like going crazy. I was like, I'm like I was like, I have multiple parts and they're all talking, and it was really hard. And she's like, we're going to take it one part at a time. So each client is an individual, and I guess there is no cookie cutter, like here, take an amoxicillin for, 1 week and you'll be fine. Everyone's very individualized. And I think it's important to not get jaded as clinicians, of like, oh, well, this is the script and, it's not working because he's not doing it or she's not doing it, the work. And a lot of times, some clinicians may go that route of like, they're just not ready, they're not doing the work, instead of, well, what else can I pull out of my hat that they can do?
I think that's kind of a good segue for like how the program came about really is that, I've had therapists who without them, I may be dead. And they'd been incredibly helpful. And when I look at Charlene, I had so much respect for her because um, clients were getting sober working with her. And it's like, how do you do that in a 50-minute session? And I think if a specialist in sex addiction is charged with helping somebody heal from this thing within 50 minutes, it's like a hell of a task. It's hard to do, almost next to impossible. It's like an impossible job, realistically, to treat trauma, to do psychoeducation, to behavioral change, and and structure and accountability and all of that. It's like an impossible task. So to be like, okay, you're a CSAT now, like I still, even the best of the best are going to be like, oh. And so I saw her doing really well with that alone. And it also made me think about like guys that I was sponsoring and myself and difficulties that I was having and like what else is needed here to really move people in the right direction. And so exactly what I was talking about, structure, behavioral change, being able to do this IFS type work and trauma work with the therapist, having a team, having a lot of love, a lot of eyes, to defeat and work through an intimacy disorder. You're going to need a lot of intimacy touch points to begin to acclimate a person to, you know, uh, a loving community, because the truth is, I think it started out that I basically made a decision early on to say, I can't trust this planet. I can't trust this world. I can't, these caregivers, it's not going to work. I'm on my own. And once I made that decision, life became a very difficult place. It wasn't a decision that I made consciously, but it was a survival choice. And I think that's what it comes down to with addiction. It's
Yeah.
not a failing. It's like survival and then brain chemistry and it takes off and it really does require a lot to undo years and years and years of trauma, maladaptive coping, having to reframe thinking that just doesn't work. It's a ton of work. And so to expect one clinician to do that in 50 minutes, it's like zero. Like, no, I mean, not really.
Right, right. Yeah. Well, sometimes too, because I am a CSAT supervisor, so I supervise people who are getting their CSAT. And I tell them, like, this program was designed based on residential care. And so transitioning that to outpatient care, you're right to like feel overwhelmed doing that because it was not really designed for outpatient care. I think you can transition it to outpatient care, but like you said, you're going to have to involve other parts because you're not a residential treatment center.
And I think that's what, Josh was kind of like picking up with me. It's because I started my career in a residential treatment center and I had that support of like group supervision and staffing and, large group, small group, educational group. When I went as a solo practitioner, it was like, this is a lot. Like, I can't do all this in 50 minutes and then, not see them again in a week. It worked, but it took a lot longer. There was a lot of relapses, a lot of heartbreaks on, the addict side, the partner side. I would have to refer them out to other people. And that was a lot on the client because they're like, we're seeing like, 2, 3 therapists a week and, who has time for this? And I get it. So, one of the things that we got in our training, as was like the whole like recovery start kit. And I remember I purchased it and it sat like in the bottom of my desk for like 5 years. And I'm like, this is so, like, I don't even know where to begin with this. And during COVID, Josh, kept pushing me like, we're going to do this. Like, we're going to make this come to life. You're going to do all the videos. You're going to talk through everything. He's like, I'm going to do the meditations to make it accessible, especially during COVID, for people that weren't going to treatment centers or, going to therapy. And that's kind of like how it started as let's do an intensive outpatient virtually so that they could still be at home and not have to go away to a residential, but still have that team focus of you as one person are super important and we are all working for you and to get you better. And that's what I felt when I worked at the residential treatment center, right? I had clients that would come up to me years later. I wasn't even their primary therapist and say like, oh my God, that group that you did changed my life. Like I love the way that, you helped me because it didn't matter whose client it was. We were all in it together and we wanted everyone to, to flourish and to thrive. So we started and we did it. We did all the videos. We, replicated that residential feel in an IOP. And
And
he's
virtually.
yeah, virtually. And he's like definitely like the brains behind the whole virtual piece because I'm like, I'm a therapist. I just do therapy. That's all I do. But he's really taken it, I think, to where we are today with like the whole AI stuff, which I'm not very good at or, use as much. So he could talk a little bit more about that, but I know that, it's been helpful definitely for the therapists that we've worked with.
Yeah, just really quickly to piggyback off of what she was saying about having to do the clinical work but not getting the structure. On the other end of it, I was working with guys in 12-step work and realizing that even with a lot of the structure and the accountability, they didn't have the trauma work that needed. So you do need both. So she was seeing they were lacking one thing. I was seeing those with that thing lacking the other. And I was like, okay, there needs to be some way of putting this together in mass because this is 18 million guys are going through this in this country. Nobody's talking about it. It's a non-issue. And yet there are guys, that I was working with who didn't matter how much money they had, success they had in their lives, they were suicidal, not going to make it. And I realized it really didn't matter, whether you were on fixed income or making millions of dollars. The issue was the same, and everybody needed some hope. So, when I thought about treatment centers costing so much money and people having difficulty even afterwards, I was like, there has to be some other way of doing this in a way that's smart and makes sense and is inexpensive, accessible. And so that was kind of the way things came about. Now, the way things are today in the program is not like they were 2.5 years ago when they started. And it's just kind of evolved, learning like what works and what doesn't. So it started off initially as not even really an IOP. It was a lot of psychoeducation and homework, shared in group and processed in group online. And I realized, okay, these guys need more touch points. So let's increase it to 2 groups, 3 groups. And then, okay, a lot of this is still cerebral and they're doing the work, but they're not getting relief. I can see they're edgy. And it's like, so what is it? These guys are not going to stick and stay if they don't get relief now. They need tools now. So I I had to personally experience and experiment with tools myself. So like a lot of the things that change are things that I've had to try on myself first and then with other people to see if they work. So um, ways of regulating, different ways of taking care of dysregulation that work quickly. And there are different types of things that work for different people. So discovering that over time was important. And I think finally, I don't think that anybody is going to stick and stay in this recovery and see themselves to the other side unless they're able to begin to envision a sex life that might be better than the one that relationship with sex that they might have in the future that would be better than what they have now. So, um,
Yeah.
all of the and some of the intensity, some of the highs and lows, the wonder, the crazy, whatever. Also, with in addition, you know, safety, closeness, and for a lot of guys coming in, that's like oil and vinegar. They don't want to hear it. They want to run from that. And so they're like, I'm not going to envision that. And I don't force them to do it. But can you believe that there's something like that? And on a neurochemical level, it's like when I'm compulsively after porn or prostitutes or whatever, it's very much like something speedy, like a speedy drug, and also like an opiate. So I feel myself really focused and driven and also safe. So it is like a very strong chemical that I don't want to let go of. And I really have to be able to convince guys that there's a better drug and there's a more lasting drug, you know? So that's become a big part of the psychoeducation, and just the day-to-day behavioral training is a big part of what we do, aside from you know, working through, and we do use facing the shadow.
Mm-hmm. So it also, it had started off as like a cohort, right? Where it was like closed, you know, 4 to 5 guys. So like super intimate, super small, you know, 10 weeks. And 10 weeks isn't enough. It just, you know, it's like, I was like, even when people are in res, no one's in residential for 10, you know, for 10 weeks. They're usually, you know, 30 to 60 days, then they go to outpatient, then they go to aftercare. Like it's a long process. So the idea of we're going to go through a workbook in 10 weeks and, you know, off you go, he started experiencing like, this isn't like, it wasn't that it wasn't working. He's like, I feel like I could give more, right? Like they're not fully ready. And some guys would, you know, almost like relapse right before the group ended just to stay connected, which is common. So now, you know, he shifted like the model to more not open-ended, because there still has to be a structure of like, okay, I graduated in a way, quote unquote, but more of like a rolling. And I thought that was very beneficial when I was working in treatment, to have someone with, you know, 2 months sober helping that one person that came in that, you know, doesn't believe he's going to get 3 days. So I think that, you know, has definitely been helpful to extend it and not feel like so rushed. Because sometimes, you know, it's like a very cunning disease. If I tell a client, hey, you're going to have to commit to this amount of work for 8 or 10 weeks, they're like, I can't. They will come up with a million excuses why they cannot. But if you say, you know, it's 5 to 6 months, 2 groups, we have, you know, the stuff, it just releases some of that, you know, like stress, and they're more open to it. You know, which is the same thing that we would do like in a residential treatment. You know, we don't tell people right off the bat, you're going to be here for 4 months for the hills.
Right. So it's more like hop in here. This is the plan. It may take 2 months for you to feel like you've gotten through it, and we feel like you've gotten through it and gotten what you've needed, or it may take 6. We don't necessarily know. But I mean, what I saw happening after 10 weeks is
they wanted to stay.
Yeah, they wanted to stay, or when they would leave a couple weeks later, because we work with, this program's interesting in that we work with a referring CSAT as a team. So their therapist already knows them super, super well. And so that's one point of leverage for us, is that we already have somebody on the inside that knows everything. They debrief us, and we are able to take information from the groups, and we chat. And it really is like an inpatient type thing. And so guys would go back to them after the 10 weeks, and they'd tell their therapist, oh yeah, but I can do porn. You know, my thing was escorts. I'm like, I was like, dude, like I have like, we went over this so many times. I've heard it come out of your mouth like 10 times that was off limits. And now you're saying like, oh yeah, no, I don't. It's that cunning, baffling, and powerful. And I try to tell him, like, you know, when you've run so many images and you've run so much time through this network one way, you know, it's like digging out the Grand Canyon. It's like, you want to fill that in 10 days with 3 people, like, or 10 weeks. with 3 people, like, no, like it's going to take a lot more to undo
Hmm.
that, you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think, you know, I think that it is a little bit different than residential, though, in that you guys are working at the same time. Usually, like if I'm referring to a residential program, I mean, they'll say they'll keep in contact with me. That's very rare. I hear from them when they're discharging back to me. And so I think that's one of the things that stood out to me about your guys' program and that I really like is that you guys are working and providing these things because a lot of CSATs don't provide group therapy even. And we know that group therapy is such a powerful component of recovery. And so you guys are offering those things and offering more than the individual therapist can do. At the same time, they're still working with their individual therapist. I
Mhm.
think that's just such a plus.
And I think that's, we always say, of course, we want to like take everyone, but this program isn't really for everyone, right? There are some therapists that are like, it's too much. I don't want to deal with it, right? Like,
Hmm.
it's drop them off, fix them, and then send them back to me when, when they're better. And Josh will definitely be like, well, then this isn't the right fit, right? Because I don't want to just, work with someone and that's it. I want to work as a team. Because that's what's best for this client is
Hmm.
that team part. So he spends a ton of time, and I am not, I will say, I have a full practice. I have 2 little kids. I'm like, I don't have time to be on the phone with another therapist
Hmm.
for like, and with all of these clients, I'm like, I just can't. So he does a lot of that. Like he spends a ton of time talking to the individual, like referring therapists and continuing the care with the clients. But for those that still want that, but maybe don't have, the time, the AI generated notes that come from the groups, when I read some of them, I'm like, this is incredible. Like, I mean, again, because I don't really use a lot of like Chat GPT, and I'm like, wow, I can't believe that. I mean, everything that the person is working on, what they need to work on, an intervention that may work. It was like amazing. So the therapist will get that. If they don't want to talk on the phone, they just read it and do it. But it is very much therapist involved.
It's funny that you say it that way because really in the beginning and even today, believe it or not, the end client for me is actually the CSAT clinician.
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
when the clinician is happy and knows that they know when real work's being done, they know when the client's getting better, and when they are like, yes, this is working, then we already know that the client is getting better. And so I wanted to develop better tools to actually give them better information. And so started with, these guys authorize recording of our sessions, and we extract transcripts. Well, first and foremost, they're screened for a bunch of different types of things, mainly ADHD stuff, attachment stuff, a few other things so that we can learn how to better help them. People with earlier trauma or significantly more um, fragmented and have a lot more difficulty in sticking to structure. We treat them. It's very kind of individualized and boutique because it has to be because
Hmm.
it's the only way you can actually treat these guys. And so I need data and information, and the more of it, the better on intake and while we're processing these things, and to come up with a treatment plan with the therapist and use the AI to test it and see is it working, what type of language is working with them, what type of behavioral changes are being adopted and working and not. We need to learn from this because the truth is, like, even with the best clinicians, recovery rates are not okay right
Hmm.
now.
Hmm.
And it's no fault of the clinician, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, often
So
I think it is I mean, sometimes it is that it's just so many issues going on that
yeah,
that is hard to treat. Sometimes it is just the lack of additional support systems. I think there's a lot of reasons why recovery rates aren't what we would like them to be.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the aim really has been to help the clinician, and a lot of it also is to learn. It's a learning process, and continuing to learn what works, what doesn't, because I think that, well, and it's not that I think that, I know that, for example, I think it was like 70 something percent of um, substance use, people with SUD in recovery have experienced suicidal ideation because of compulsive sex or compulsive relationships. So, I've had talks, I had an interview with the NIH trying to get them to understand that this is a substance use issue. In my case, this was fueling SUD, so um, it's a lot more of the substance abuse problem than people really know,
Yeah,
So that was another reason why, we needed the data.
right. Years ago, I like the like sex addiction 12-step fellowships here in Utah are pretty poor, I would say. Um, and so years ago, when online meetings weren't all that great either, or that accessible, I would start referring them to like AA programs because we did have some good AA programs
Mhm.
here. And they didn't care that I was sending sex addiction clients there. But what I was not expecting was how many guys from those meetings started reaching out and contacting me. And they would talk about like, yeah, there's this guy in my meeting. And like they're, sometimes 10, 12 years sober from substances. And they're saying, but listening to him talk about sex addiction, I think that's my issue. Like, and so we just had this huge influx of clients who had been sober from substances for years, very successfully, all of a sudden starting to, ask them like, where do you go for therapy? And then they'd call us and we were just like, oh, and it was interesting, maybe not too surprising, but I was not expecting that to happen.
Yeah, that's definitely been my experience too. I've had, a bunch of people with a lot of years in AA that, struggle with the sexual.
Hmm.
That part makes me really sad. I think, like, I was in a men's meeting with 13 guys, and this topic of porn and sex addiction, for whatever reason, came up. Outside issue, they didn't care. They were like, all right, we're going to go for it and talk about it. And, as it turns out, 10 of 13 of the guys were still struggling, many of them with double digit sobriety, and could not stop this stuff. And I'm thinking, happy, joyous, and free, like, that's impossible if, so this needs to be addressed. And it's
Hmm.
an enormous problem, just like you're saying, in that community.
Right. Hmm. Where they are having success here and not even recognizing this other issue that
Right.
is also an addiction.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's no shortage of people to help.
Hmm. Right. Yeah. I love when you told me about it, Josh, in Arizona. I mean, I'm aware that there is a gap in services between residential and outpatient. And so when you were talking about it, I just thought that's really innovative. And I mean, I'm aware of it. Was I thinking of doing anything? No, about it. And so when you were explaining your program and just how that works, I can really see the benefit to a lot of people um, who want to do the work and are doing the work individually, but just need more and understanding that there is that option now that is available and doing it online. I mean, I found in 2022 because we do run like therapy groups and in 2020 we all went remote and I wondered if that would decrease the effectiveness of in-person groups. And I was surprised how effective they were still online and how much they could still go deep, they could still connect with each other, they would still have the same conversations that we would hear in in-person groups that didn't change online. And I think a lot of people may be hesitant to that because it's like, I don't know, it's not in person, but I haven't found that to be an obstacle.
Mhm.
Surprising, right?
Yeah, it was surprising.
And I guess it's like, if you get too overwhelmed by the meeting, you can just shut the laptop and run away.
Right. Yeah. Which I mean, in person, you just kind of dissociate and think of something else anyway.
Yeah,
So
right, right.
they're doing that anyway.
Anyway,
It's just different
yeah.
online. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about, let's just get into what's the name of your program? How do people find it?
Intimacy Ehab. They can find it. Our company's return to intimacy, so return number two intimacy. And they can go return to intimacy.com and find the site, the actual rehab, which I've I use the phrase ehab, so it's an electronic rehab. So an ehab, so it's ehab.returntointimacy.com.
Hmm.
Um, and there's a ton of information about it. There's a blog, and there are plenty of free tools to use if you may not be ready or just want to kind of dip your toe into things. And the blogs are a lot of fun and I think informative in videos. So there's plenty of material there too. And we're available.
And
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
the referral process, because someone else had asked this in another like interview that we had done, is really from the CSAT, right? So like normally to start the process, the CSAT would contact us, tell us about, the client, and then the CSAT would give the client our phone number, and then the client would call. But it would be initiated by the CSAT so we can get to know the CSAT and, a little
Hmm.
bit about
Hmm.
the client. And then from there, the relationship with the CSAT starts, right? Like,
Right.
yeah, he called or she called and, he's starting, we're doing this. No, he didn't show up, so that the CSAT is aware of whatever the follow through may be
Right.
or
And
not.
there's
Hmm.
stats that have the time, willingness, ability, and a passion to be able to have that connection. And some don't for whatever reason, and which is okay. And we're able to accommodate that also. But I would say that the best part about this, at least for me, is the fun in doing it with other people. That feeling of really getting through to somebody and helping somebody heal because you know that several people care and there are several sets of eyes on them. Um, that feels wonderful. It's like that's
Hmm.
why we're doing this.
Yeah. So when they start, what would they expect? How do you start them in the program?
Uh-huh. Well, first and foremost, well, they do a screening for a bunch of different things to see so that I can see what kind of protocols will work. And I just start with behavioral stuff right off the bat. Um, different tools to regulate. And truth be told, one of the most powerful ones is very simple IFS stuff. So journaling around critical parent, inner child, the teen, and a loving parent. And really, I've never really liked the phrase "your addict" or "your inner addict" or "what is the addict" in it, because I really do believe that is a teenage part that's trying to cope the best that they can and
Hmm.
protect and care for that inner child. And I think that any healing is going to be done or brokered through him. And so we need to work through him. And I think as a teen growing up, that's kind of what I always wanted, was a bunch of buddies to commiserate that understood me. And I think that's what we start to deliver right away, is connection, and rapport with the teen, and changing behaviors and making it fun and normalizing the insanity of this thing.
Hmm.
And and I think first and foremost, diminishing and working to diminish shame. And if there was one topic, it would be that, just
Hmm.
denial and shame.
Can you maybe like describing the structure of the group, like how many times, how
Right.
long?
So typically it's three groups a week. They are required to have a session with their individual CSAT, and
Every
they
week.
every week, and they get a coaching session with me during the first month. It's two meetings with me, so it's two online groups. It's a lot. It's two online groups live. It's one pre-recorded group that's been edited down for the topic. That it's about half an hour of psychoeducation on the topic by way of video. And then yeah, those meetings with the therapist and coach. And it is all done by way of an iPhone app, which we had developed, which also has a forum to keep in contact and discuss things. So it really begins with behavioral change and destroying denial.
Hmm. So do they start right away in a group, in
Yeah.
one of your groups? Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I really like the model. I think it was, again, very innovative and just that you guys, I mean, it was COVID, right? So a lot of us were learning online platforms and how to do things through computers and iPhones and stuff like that. So I still think that was very just innovative. I know, Josh, you kind of said that your brain's kind of always going like that. So maybe not surprising to you, but
There's also, which I think is really cool, helpful, important. Like these guys are put on a WhatsApp chat,
mm-hmm,
and it fosters like that communication of I'm struggling, or Josh will be,
mm-hmm,
like, how did the meditation go yesterday? Or how did your spiritual action, are you doing your spiritual action plan? Which is really nice because a lot of times in individual therapy, we're not doing that with our clients, right? There's like clear
mm-hmm,
boundaries, like, no, you can't call me every time, there's a trigger. We have to wait till next week. So that of like, okay, I need help right now, and you're the one that I'm seeing and I'm comfortable with. I think that really helps them also. And again, gives them that feeling of, oh, you really care. You mean I can call you and text you, when it's like, yeah, you can. We're
mm-hmm,
in it together. I had a client recently that I have had for 5 years. He was, sober from drugs and alcohol for 10, 11 years, would have 4 months sober from porn, relapse, 5 months. I mean, I did everything under the sun with him. Send him to like a trauma therapist. He was doing that. He just could not stay sober. He did the program, and it was, oh my gosh.
Hold on. No,
Well,
that's, ooh.
did your
Oh,
power go out?
no. Nope. This is our our lighting no longer detected us.
Ah,
So
movement.
apparently you're speaking with lizards.
um, he did the program, did a lot of like the inner child work, and he has like 6 months sober now, which he's never had.
Hmm.
But one of the things he told me in our last session, he's like, I really want to thank you and Josh. He's like, because you guys like never gave up on me.
Mm.
Like no matter, it's hard when someone's continuously relapsing. It's really hard to like have the stick to itiveness as a clinician. But I feel like that hey, we're working with you as a team, like, because in this case I was his therapist. So Josh and I are both working, and we're here for you. And yes, you can't call me every time you have a trigger, but you could, you have your
Hmm.
WhatsApp group. It was an amazing, amazing experience for him.
And really nobody gave up on us. And I can't
Right.
really, when I get honest, I can't bear the feeling of giving up on a little kid, you know?
Hmm.
That's
Yeah.
really, I mean, that's what it is.
Mhm.
Well, and most likely that has happened for them as a little kid.
Of
And
course.
I find so often that there are a lot of things, or can be a lot of things in recovery, and even with the therapist, that is reparenting or giving them that experience. Because I do think for healthy enough people, right? They had parents who believed in them, sat down and like talked to them about, yeah, this is hard. You can do it. What do you think? How do you think you should handle it? And there was just that transfer of belief in that kid. I was reading an article 2 nights ago, I think, and it was saying, I mean, what caught my attention was this one skill. Like, so many parents are trying to give all these experiences to their kids to make them successful. And they said we can narrow it down to one thing, and that was an emotionally available parent who is transferring that to the child and believing in the child and making them feel good enough. And, so I was like, oh, yeah, I didn't know when I was going to click into the article what it would say. But I was like, no, yeah, we do know that. The one thing that people need is that belief in them, and that I think often starts as parents transfer that to kids. If that doesn't happen, then that's going to be therapists, group members, all of that other stuff, giving that to them.
And that reminds me of like, one of the interesting and like neat things of this, for the most part, it's always like female CSATs that we work. So between the female therapist and then like Josh as like the coach, it's like kind of there's a lot of that repairing of like mom and dad, and like,
Yes.
because there'll be clients that'll tell Josh after a while, like, I don't know if I don't want to continue with my therapist. And it's like Josh is like, no, that's not an option. Like we're in this together. Um, so that whole male female dynamic and the client really learning how to be in a healthy relationship with a male and female that's helping him, I think has been really important as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that too.
Modeling the reparenting, and basically the little guy, all he's really wanted was somebody to sit with him, and it's like training yourself to be that person who sits with him even in silence, and that's what's most healing, I think, and that's what I haven't known to do. That's one, and not knowing to do that's been terrifying. So kind of getting somebody up to speed and doing that and showing up for themselves really is the heart of all of these practices.
Yes. Yeah. I had a client earlier this week and we were talking and he was saying like, I'm going to get there at some point. And I said, I know you are. I said, I think I believe in you more than you do. And that's okay, but you'll get there.
It's amazing.
Yeah. And there were people like that there for me. So many of them. I would not be sober without them. And I have to include the clinicians who have, especially those with EMDR. And I wouldn't be here without the clinicians and all the that I've received. Honestly, it's not just 12-step, like it's all of it.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw the APA came out recently and made some statements and recommended protocols for complex PTSD. Like even just recognizing that complex PTSD is different than PTSD. And for clinicians, one of the things that they did state was, regardless of what modality you're using, attunement is the biggest success factor for people with CPTSD.
Yep.
Well, Josh and Charlene, thank you so much for coming on my podcast and talking about your program. Thank you for just creating the program and loving these clients into recovery and offering them the supports they need.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Yep. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Hey, everyone. I wanted to talk about that podcast episode. And as you can tell, Josh is very easy to talk to. Charlene, I didn't meet her in Arizona, but she's also very easy to talk to. And I think their passion and their belief in recovery definitely came through in that conversation. I had mentioned on an earlier podcast, on a recent-ish podcast, that I had gone to symposium with Rachel, that you know, and another one of our colleagues here at Healing Paths. And I was giving Rachel a hard time when we were there, in a joking manner, of course, because she was so much more social than I had seen her in the past. And I am social there, but when it is over, I am depleted and I am done talking because I am talking to people throughout the day. I'm going to lunch with people that I don't normally see, which I love doing when I'm there. And I go to dinner with people and then we talk after dinner. And I actually do look forward to symposium. And as an introvert, it completely drains me by the time I'm back. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, Rachel and I and Josh had a long wait until we had to head to the airport for our flights, like 5 hours, 6 hours. And, Rachel and I had gone and found this great Mexican place in Phoenix that we loved and had lunch. And when we went back to the hotel and we were sitting in their lobby, Rachel took a little bit of a nap. I was listening to something on my phone and I think playing a game. And because I am not a napper, I've never been a napper. And we were sitting on a couch facing one direction. Josh's couch was right against the back of our couch facing the other direction. And he was asleep when we sat down. And Rachel woke up and then he woke up and Rachel initiated a conversation with him. We talked the entire time until we had to go to the airport. And I enjoyed it. It just extended the time that I was being social before I could take time to be by myself and rejuvenate and replenish. I've talked to Josh a couple of times. We exchanged phone numbers, and I've been meaning to ask him to come on the podcast. So I was glad that both Josh and Charlene were able to make it today and share with you their stories, their passion, and the program that they developed as a result. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did talking to them. And as always, at the end of this episode, I want to remind you that your story matters. Remember, there's something meaningful in every chapter. Don't wait to share your story until it's finished. Until next time, Jackie.